Welcome to Retail's Most Wanted, the podcast that examines the latest issues related to organized retail crime and how retailers and policymakers are fighting back against today's organized crime syndicates. I'm your host, Marty Carpenter. He's Dave Studdert, a founding partner with LVT. Coming up on today's show, Dave, we've got another Dave, David Johnston from the National Retail Federation. Going to have a great conversation with him about policies that they're working on across the country and individually in each state. But before we get to that, I wanted to see what you thought about this, get your take on this. Axios reported that the Washington, D.C. Council recently approved a sweeping public safety bill aimed at addressing their surge in crime, particularly homicides. Now, the bill introduces tougher penalties for things like theft and gun crimes, reversing some of the progressive reforms that they had put in place just years ago. Key provisions of this include creating a new crime category for organized retail theft, reviving 90s-era anti-loitering laws, and granting police permission to view body cam footage reports before writing incident reports. So, all right, Dave, with all that on the table, how significant do you believe the creation of a new crime categorization is for ORC when it comes to combating this specific type of criminal activity?
I think it's great, right? I think the ability to shine a light. You can't lump some of these into these broader-based categories. To get real definitive, I think will help. It'll help navigate really how we identify, prosecute the criminal activity specific to ORC. So I think it's a benefit.
Yeah, treating it like petty theft is not proven to be very effective.
Doesn't work.
Yeah. You know, historically, we've seen sort of a divide among policymakers, with some advocating for progressive criminal justice reform and others pushing for tougher measures in response to rising crime rates. Are we starting to see the pendulum sort of shift back against the progressive push in this and a little bit more of being tough on crime?
It's a really interesting question, right? And I think it being an evidence-based, the way we look at it, if we heat map the United States of America, you can see where we really have a challenge with organized retail crime and really just crime as a whole. And a lot of that is based on an ideological divide. So I do think we're starting to see a swing. I think the pendulum is coming full circle on what works, what doesn't, to decriminalize certain things or change cash bond or pick the legislation. We can see areas that really have challenges, that the communities have been affected broadly by ORC, and that pendulum's starting to swing back. Absolutely, 100%.
Yep. It's one of those where in a lot of these cities, these major metropolitan areas, now we've had some evidence of how the policies actually work when you put them in place, and in many cases they don't work.
Yeah.
And so switching it up is just a matter of saying, hey, the worst thing you can do is say that you're going to keep doing the same thing and expect different results. So
Exactly.
Nice to see a little bit of a shift. All right, coming up next, our conversation with David Johnston. Retail's Most Wanted is brought to you in partnership with the Attorney General Alliance, where U.S. state attorneys general collaborate on emerging legal issues and the rule of law at home and across borders. Learn more at agalliance.com. Retail's Most Wanted is brought to you in partnership with LVT, securing physical environments through intelligent automation. Learn more at lvt.com. That's lvt.com. Welcome back. David Johnston is Vice President of Asset Protection and Retail Operations for the National Retail Federation. He leads policy initiatives and member programs around crime, violence, loss, and issues challenging the profitability of retail store operations across the country. With over 3 decades of loss prevention and corporate security expertise, his experience includes senior roles with global organizations as a practitioner, a consultant, and a solution provider. David Johnston, thanks so much for spending time with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me today, Marty and Dave.
All right. How have the challenges around loss prevention evolved over the years? Because you've been doing this for a long time. So tell me how you've seen these challenges change over time.
Well, first, a lot has changed, right? Let's look at the retail industry itself. And in the over 3 decades that I've been part of retail, we've seen the increase of e-commerce, omni-channel. We've gone through a COVID-19 pandemic. And we've also seen a much smaller global landscape where, now it doesn't matter where you are, the retail goods are available across the entire world, whether it be through manufacturing, supply chain, or even, to acquire. But one thing is for certain, that the theft landscape, the threat landscape, and the risk landscape has most certainly changed. And first and foremost, if we look at the theft, when I started catching shoplifters, it's not new. Shoplifting has always existed. It was more of an amateur, opportunistic, for need type of crime. We did have our level of professional shoplifters. I started out in a department store in a major metropolitan area. So we did have professionals who were taking orders and going and stealing and the high-priced and high-fashion goods. And you had your kids and your opportunistic shoplifting and so forth. But much has changed in the last, 5 or 6 years that I'm sure we're going to get into. So there's a lot that's now impacting retailers across the board.
David, I'd love for you to talk to us for a minute about the specific impacts that organized retail crime is having, not only on the retailers, but specifically consumers and communities. And really, how is that retail industry, how is the retail industry fighting it?
Yeah, well, let's start with, the changes that we're starting to see from a retail theft perspective, because ORC comes into play. As I just mentioned, shoplifting is not new, professional shoplifting is not new, but what we have seen over the last 4 or 5 years is this new breed of shoplifters. These individuals who, the frequent offenders, the merchandise that they're taking, it's not just high fashion, high priced, it's now everyday items, it's resellable material. The proliferation of online marketplaces has created a new outlet to resell stolen goods where, again, looking at the past, we've always had bodegas and fences and flea markets in these physical locations. It's now expanded greatly into the online marketplace, and even its reach has become global, where when we start talking about the organized retail crime element, it's not just the shoplifting, even though that is a big impact. It's getting into cargo theft and supply chain. It's getting into the e-commerce and the online digital fraud components of it. It's even starting to get into the gift cards and the digital currency sides, which have also expanded its global reach to local groups all the way to transnational groups where probably not state-sponsored, but I would take that some foreign states are aware that some of this activity is happening in their own countries. Where that impact is, well, first, many believe that retail theft is not a victimless crime. That's far from the truth. It impacts everybody. It impacts the retail organization. It impacts their employees, the consumers, the communities, and I will go as far as saying even our national economy and our national security. The retail industry provides 1 in every 4 jobs. It is a high provider of our gross domestic product. Protecting that means that we have to protect the economy of the United States. And with what we're starting to see, the violence taking place in the stores, that has an impact to the retailer with the ability to hire and retain employees. The need to secure and lock up merchandise, that has an impact to the consumer's ability to access those items. It also has the impact of sales. And then in our National Retail Security Report, we asked the question of our respondents, retail companies, what actions have you taken in response to increased violence and crime? Have you closed stores? Have you reduced hours? Have you altered product selection? And we had a high percentage of answers to those 3 questions. And what that does is that in turn impacts the communities, their ability to provide life necessities to their local citizens, their ability to generate tax revenue from the retail environment, and even the ability to provide community services, because when retailers close down, they lose tax revenue, jobs, and it creates deserts where it makes it more difficult for folks to obtain their goods. So, there's a great impact from the retail theft, and that all stems, what we believe, the majority of it stems from these increased organized retail crime groups.
The impact is incredibly wide, David. Thank you for that answer. I'm curious, as the nation's largest retail trade association, tell me a little bit about the resources that the NRF offers retailers, really to educate and inform them on their organizations and specific to ORC and potentially other types of retail theft. What are the resources out there?
Yeah, well, as a trade association, our role is to be the convener of retailers, industry partners like yourself, and focus on events, advocacy, research, engage our retailers in benchmarking through our councils and committees, and then also to work to bring public awareness and education to the Hill. So a lot of the work that I do is working with the retailers and industry partners themselves to help them get together, collaborate, and determine the best practices that fit not only their individual organizations, but perhaps the segments and most certainly the industry as a whole. Another key part of my role is being the voice of those individuals. It's my responsibility to be on shows like this, to engage with the media, to provide the accurate narrative of what is happening out there. Particularly that impacts the safety, the security, and the profitability of retailers. And then, of course, where we have to go and look at legislation, the NRF is at the leading front of that. With our CORCA bill, the Combating Organized Retail Crime Act, we've been a big proponent of that. We've been pushing it on Capitol Hill through the last 2 sessions. Again, legislation in organized retail crime is not new. There are many predecessors of mine who have been working on it for decades, but we're looking forward, and we're fortunate, and I think we've remained positive that the CORCA bill now is going to be pushing forward. One event that I do want to highlight is last October, we had a Fight Retail Crime Day where over 70 retail professionals, the majority of them loss prevention and asset protection leaders, got an opportunity to go to Capitol Hill, sit in front of congressional leaders in their offices, and actually talk about the personal impact and the personal stories of their brands. This is something that many LP and AP professionals haven't done in the past. So they're working tirelessly to educate legislators, prosecutors, law enforcement on really what's happening out there. And I think it's going to go and help the industry as a whole as we start to look at a community effort in fighting what we're seeing today with crime, violence, and theft.
You referenced CORCA, Combating Organized Retail Crime Act, and your efforts there on Capitol Hill. Talk to us a little bit about how this legislation will address ORC challenges that we face every day.
Yeah, we are big proponents and of the CORCA bill and the federal legislation. First and foremost, it is not going to be a silver bullet. It is going to be what I'd consider a second step, where the first step was the Inform Act that was passed in December of 2023, where we were able to look and have online marketplaces verify and validate their high sellers, making sure that they were legitimate organizations. With the CORCA bill, that's going to help to establish a Center for Organized Retail Crime underneath Homeland Security Investigations, which is a component of Department of Homeland Security. They have been doing great work in support of retailers and local and state law enforcement in the area of organized theft groups and organized retail crime. And this center is going to be an opportunity for collaboration and collective resources of intelligence and information by federal agencies, state and local agencies, along with the retail industry. And it's going to also afford resources to state and local law enforcement in the form of federal law enforcement investigative resources, where a lot of these networks, these organized crime networks, they are hitting multiple jurisdictions. And for some local law enforcement or even state law enforcement, it can be challenging if you have an organized group who is going over county lines, city lines, or state lines. And by bringing in federal resources, it's going to allow them to identify, disrupt, and disable these organized networks. The last piece is to create an aggregated threshold that makes it a federal crime. It's about $5,000 in theft in a 12-month period. Many people may think that that's low for a federal crime, but it's actually a similar bar to other criminal activities at the federal level, and that's going to help to level set all the various felony thresholds state to state, where the focus is not to bring the shoplifter to a federal court. The focus is to be able to use federal resources and federal means to go after those organized groups, because they're the ones that are creating the demand for the individuals, many of them less challenged, the homeless, the addicted, the those that are financially stressed. They're directing them, they're orchestrating them to go and do the crime. So let's remove the demand for that. And then, I dare say it, but hopefully we go back to normal times where, again, shoplifting is just the amateur, the opportunistic, who is doing it for need.
It'd be nice, wouldn't it? We've talked a little bit about the federal level. Talk to us, tell us, what are the state level legislative priorities that you guys are focusing on?
Yeah, organized retail crime, the retail theft, the violence that we're seeing today, it is not going to happen in a vacuum on Capitol Hill. It's also not going to happen in a vacuum at a local community or state community. It's going to take a all community effort at the local, state, and federal level. NRF, what we do at a state level is, first and foremost, is we provide support to the state retail associations. So we find out from them what the pressing issues are. We, of course, learn from our members what are some of the challenges in certain states. And when necessary, we will go and assist the state retail associations in helping with resources, support, legislation, benchmarking, and research in key areas. A couple quick examples, and it goes far beyond my area of responsibility, first of all, with the NRF. It gets into labor, employment, privacy, payments, anything that could impact or disrupt the retail industry. But some key examples in my area would be California's workplace violence law, SB 553. That was just enacted, and on July 1st, retailers have to have individual workplace violence programs and assessments along with training of all their employees. That's a heavy lift. Retailers are very good at putting together crisis prevention and crisis management programs, business continuity, and they have it for a number of different types of violence. But we're helping our retailers in providing them with guidance, with an understanding of what the law is going to be, and also helping them with some resource kits and information, allowing them to go and best comply with that. Another piece would be areas of privacy, particularly where it encompasses technologies that retailers use, things like biometrics or, again, in your world, license plate recognition, things that have certain elements of data sharing and privacy elements. We want to make sure that lawmakers are educated on the benefits of using this information, how retailers today even have their guardrails in place in how they use this information, because sometimes they can blindly implement legislation that could probably more greatly impact a retailer's ability to conduct proper business than to actually focus on the issue that they're really trying to get, which is protecting the privacy of our citizens and our data.
David, we always talk about states being the laboratory of democracy, where states are supposed to figure out policies and then they work their way up to the federal level. This feels like one of those areas where businesses or states, I would actually say, are doing this in cooperation with business and saying, this is how we've addressed it in our state, and here's what's worked. And other states are taking that and building on it. If you could give like an overall grade for how well states are working together to try to solve a problem that impacts communities in their states, but also crosses state borders, what would you give them? Would you give them like a C+, an A-? Where do you think they'd be?
Wow, you're really getting me in trouble here, Marty.
Yeah, all right, don't give them a grade, but generally tell us how well you think things are going there.
My personal concern is that states are not working collaboratively enough on several of these issues. I think the challenge that we have in some of these issues is we do not want to start to see 50 individual states plus in having different laws of workplace violence prevention and privacy and data sharing and things of that nature. We saw it to a certain degree in the cybersecurity world a few years back, data breaches and things like that. We want to caution against that. We hope that, through the work of the NRF, the state retail associations, and the industry as a whole, is we can start to look at some foundational elements of these key issues and provide those elements to all states and help them build upon that. It may not require a federal law or, federal legislation, but can we, the one thing we don't want to have is a retailer who's in a large number of states have to go and implement individual workplace violence prevention program. Because we do know that at the core, the training, the program elements, the recovery, the response, they are the same. So I hope to see more. I think we're going to see more state legislation. So hopefully if they work together, and can they use what's already been built in one state as the foundation and then build on that versus have just a whole bunch of different laws.
Yeah. All right, I'll get you out of here on this. The NRF Protect event is scheduled for June 4th through 6th in Long Beach, California. It provides a platform for retailers to collaborate and to share best practices in asset protection. What initiatives or what topics can attendees expect to see highlighted at this year's event? And I should say, David, you guys at LVT will be out there as exhibitors as well.
We'll be there.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, thank you to David, LVT, and our industry partners, because these events do not take place without their support, their engagement, and even the work that they do day in and day out in helping the retail industry. I myself, half of my career I spent as a solution provider, so I'm familiar, as I say, with both sides of the carpet when it comes to an expo floor, and I'm very appreciative of the work that they do. As I mentioned in the very beginning of our conversation, we have a changing theft landscape, risk, and threat. So one of the things that we're bringing to this year's Protect is we're increasing the audience by inviting and having more engagement on the risk management and the legal side of things. One of our guest speakers is going to be San Diego County DA Summer Stephan, to talk about, what prosecutors need to do in order to help build collaborative relationships. We have our Fusion Center, which is going to include law enforcement, prosecutors' offices, mall partnerships, and security programs, because that's, again, is another big partnership that our retailers have to do with property owners. And then our sessions are going to focus on cybersecurity, digital online risk, traditional loss prevention or foundational loss prevention, shrink awareness, but then get into things like global threats and dealing with a polycrisis environment and how to build stronger partnerships with your risk management and your privacy attorneys. And so you can bring some of these newer technologies to the plate without the fear of privacy concerns, data sharing, and so forth. So I'm excited. This is my second Protect leading the charge for the NRF. The first one was fantastic. This one is gearing up to be even better, and we're already over last year's registration numbers year over year. So I think it's going to be a fantastic event.
David, two quick thank yous. First, a lot of times we look at these things from a macro level. I want to thank you, and I'm going to speak for Joe Q Public here, but as someone who's got a bunch of kids who shop at these stores, thank you for your efforts in keeping our community safe. And a sincere thank you for joining us here today.
Well, I'm going to thank you both. Thank you for all that you do in order to bring you bring in the industry and all the partners in what we need to do to accomplish and secure our stores and keep our people safe, whether they be employees or the consumers. So thank you very much for having me.
All right, that's it for this episode of Retail's Most Wanted. Thanks to our presenting sponsors, LVT and the Attorney General Alliance. Don't forget to hit that subscribe or follow button so you can catch each new episode. We drop a new one 3 times each month. We're also on Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube. Links for all of that is in the show notes below. Thanks so much for being with us, everyone. And as always, keep up the good fight.